Obviously, I'm a huge fan of React Native. It's a great technology that's been making a ton of progress over the last few years, which is why, more than ever, I'm curious what React Native developers have to say. Every year, Software Mansion runs a survey about React Native to see how developers are feeling about it, what the ecosystem's like, all these really important things. There's no better way to understand how React Native devs feel than to read through it, which is exactly what we're going to do now. React Native is not a single company initiative, and its modularity allows many to step up and provide a solution for each aspect. Some libraries are gaining popularity, some solutions are fading from the scene, and some limitations are becoming more apparent. All of this can make it difficult for developers to choose the right tools and libraries for their projects and be confident in their decisions. The second edition of the survey presents the trends and outlines new initiatives happening in the React Native ecosystem. Starting with this edition, we can examine the popularity and usability of specific solutions year over year. Some of these trends were expected, while others were complete surprises. We find that some aspects are getting more attention from other contributors than ever before. Take a look at the styling or debugging sections, and others. The first edition of the survey was very successful. Major players in the ecosystem are reading and responding to the data. We've also grown by more than 500 new respondents year over year, reaching nearly 2,400 unique respondents. I feel like a few more than 2,400 people are going to watch this video, so make sure you use the link in the description so you can sign up and fill it out next year if this is the type of thing that's interesting to you. Anyways, shout out to Bartholomew for working on this survey. So these things are so much work, and we need to appreciate the people who made it. I didn't get emailed when this would happen, so I'm going to quickly hide my screen, enter my email, as y'all should as well, and we're going to read through it. My email's been submitted. Let's go in. About me. The age demographics are fascinating. These actually line up pretty closely to my YouTube analytics. I'll say I have more 55 plus than I do under 18, so that part's a little different. Geez, it skews very slightly younger, but it's really interesting. Company size. This is one of my favorite questions, especially for something like React Native, where usually technologies like React Native get stereotyped as things small companies use and big companies avoid. You can see here, it's not the case at all. There's a lot of big companies with engineers that are filling out this survey. To quickly compare, this is the JavaScript survey results from 2022. So this is far from an exact comparison. There's over 10 times the respondents, but as a reference to the numbers for the React Native side, I think this will be useful. We'll see here that the 100 to 1,000 category for just JavaScript in 2022 was around 22%, and 1,000 plus was around 20%, which is about the same for 100 to 1,000. It's about 25-ish here, but then that 1,000 plus is a bit smaller. It's 10 instead of 20. So there's a difference there, and you could argue that it seems like there's a sweet spot between the 100 to 1,000 point for React Native, but in the end, it's not too big of a difference, so I wouldn't read too far into this. Just an interesting detail to compare how React Native's adopted in terms of company size compared to JavaScript and how it's adopted company size. Country or region, India's very close to US for survey respondents here. That's fascinating. Now I kind of want to go look at Flutter results and see where those stand. Very interesting overall. Also weirdly aligned with my YouTube demographics. Germany would be a lot higher. Brazil would be a good bit higher, but pretty lined up. Higher education. 67% of people have a related degree. 15% have an unrelated degree. 17% have no degree. That's crazy. It's almost equal for degree, but it's not code versus no code degree. Years of experience in React Native. 13% are less than a year, 38% are 2 to 3 years, 30% are 4 to 5, 16% are 6 or more. React Native's new enough that having 6 or more years of experience with it means you were there day one. Fascinating. Really interesting. And then total years of experience is a much more traditional normal chart. Gender, again, looks a lot like my YouTube demographics. While we know collecting and publishing diversity data can be a sensitive issue, we do think it's important to obtain the data to help measure and improve the survey's efforts in terms of inclusivity and representativeness. Agreed. Salaries. Ooh, let's compare this to the JavaScript salaries, actually. About 28% are 50 to 100K, 18% are 100 to 200, and 4% are over 200K for the JavaScript survey last year, versus here it's 4.7% 200K, a little more make 200K, 100 to 200 is 18 versus 20. Seems like a general skew to the right, but the 50 to 100 is a bit smaller. Yeah, looks like a slight skew to the right. Not much, but a slight one. Interesting. So if you want to make like theoretically 2 to 10% more money, React Native might be the way to do that. That is a joke. React Native's not going to make you more money. Developer backgrounds. Seems like most React Native devs were React devs before, but a lot of them were front-end devs that weren't using React, or back-end devs too. A much smaller portion started with Android and iOS, just interesting. Some of the best React Native devs I know actually started as Android devs. Very interesting. That doesn't pan out here in terms of the numbers. 30% of the people who did the survey have contributed to open source React Native libraries. Yeah. What? That sounds insane to me. That's insane. That this is a combination of things. This is the people who did this survey are skewing much more towards the hardcore people. React Native has a much more contributor-friendly ecosystem for sure. It's actually a pretty common meme when I talk to React core team people, where they feel like whenever someone has a problem with React Native, it gets to them immediately. But somebody has a problem with React, it doesn't get to them at all, and they just end up bitching on Twitter years later. It was interesting to see that with React Native having a more niche community, that it's this skewed. Seems like a lot of, somebody asked, like, what about the total survey respondents? Only 3% skipped the question. So it's, a lot of people who did this survey. That's 773-ish React Native contributors or React Native library contributors that have answered the survey. That's a pretty absurdly big number. For comparison, I'll run a quick poll in my Twitch chat. Have you contributed to an OSS library you use? Yes, no. Well, you guys respond to this so we can figure out what those numbers look like, which again, my audience is going to be very skewed because this isn't just the people who watch my videos. This is the people who hang out late at night to watch my live streams when I'm recording my videos. And even then, okay, that's actually a pretty buff number. If anyone is not normally one to vote, but you happen to be on Twitch, I would appreciate if you vote because I want these numbers to be as reasonable as possible considering my audience. You know what? I'll go one step further. Have you contributed to an open source library or tool that you use? Yes, no. And since it's Twitter, people want to see the results, I'll put a popcorn in here. I feel like the emote button on macOS has gotten way less stable over the last few years. We give it 12 hours, but we'll check the results in a little bit. Well, it looks like about 50-50-ish on my Twitch community. How is the Twitter poll doing? Are there just more open source contributors than we all think? Because that number shocked me. The community of people who hang out in these places and respond to Twitter polls and stuff and do surveys like this clearly skews much heavier towards open source contributors. Contributions to React Native. So this is for React Native Core. 8% of the respondents have contributed to React Native Core. That might seem insane, but y'all need to understand just how much more contribution React Native gets than React. 2,606 contributors on React Native. That's insane. A huge part of why React Native is so good isn't just because it's like React. It's specifically because the size of the community that has built all of these crazy bindings for everything from iOS and Android to like tvOS to visionOS and Oculus Quest and all these other crazy environments you never would have thought of. There's even like Xbox bindings for React Native. And that happens because there's 2,000 plus people contributing them. If we compare to the React code base, that's 1,600 contributors. That's a bit over half for something that's significantly older and used significantly more. That's a huge gap. Very interesting. We also have the industry sector section here. It seems like a lot of finance and education apps being built with React Native. Makes sense. Interesting. Mobile OS versions, reasonably current versus most recent, old, and as old as possible. Very few targeting really old. This doesn't surprise me. Target platforms, Android's slightly higher than iOS. Also very interesting to me. Good to know. Web is also higher than I thought, almost a fourth of iOS. Very interesting, actually. React Native Skia is very low as well. And of the desktop OS, this just which desktop OS are they using? Interesting. Not surprised it's mostly Mac users. Number of released apps. This is actually very interesting. That most of the people working in React Native have released more than one app with it. That's fascinating. And then team size. Also very interesting, especially when you consider the earlier number with the size of the company, that the team size, they're still 3 to 5 people or solo. Pretty small percentage were more than 10 developers on their team. And you also have to consider that when there's more than 10 devs on the team, that number is skewed up because there's 10 people per 10 plus person dev team. So this number would skew higher just because there's more people on those teams. It doesn't. So that's really telling. It's not lots of big teams building with React Native. I will also say that questions like this are not super clear usually because sadly, these types of questions are different depending on what you view a team as. Because when I was at Twitch, I was effectively on like 5 different teams depending on the size and scope of things, because I was on the web team, which had 800 plus people contributing, but my immediate team was the safety moderation tools team, which was a 3-person team. And what your team is varies a lot depending on how your company is structured. How do you use React Native? Professionally, almost all professionally. Your biggest React Native apps user count. Seems like a lot of apps in that 10 to 100K range, a decent number in the 100K to 1 mil, and then a decent bit in the 1 mil plus. I wish they flipped this and normal charted it, but I get it. Also, only me being 10% is hilarious. It is actually really nice to use something like React Native to build a one-off app for random use cases, but interesting to see that be such a big number. Let's take a look at the platform APIs. This doesn't surprise me, seeing Camera is one of the most used platform APIs. I've said this for a while. The reason you go from web to React Native is the need for specific native functionality and behaviors like the camera or permissions for accessing all of the different things you might need on iOS or sometimes even on Android now. Notifications, deep links, web view, like all of these are things. Okay, I guess deep links isn't, but like these first three are things you can only do on apps that you can't really do from the web. So it makes sense they're some of the most common. Also, file system is something you can't really do from the web. Seems like a decent chunk of these are things that aren't trivial in the browser, which is a huge incentive to start building an app with React Native. State management. This will be interesting. Quick prediction. I think MobX is going to be much more represented in here than it is in most JavaScript surveys because I know there's a big MobX cult within the React Native community. So let's take a look. I don't love the way the percentages are done here because this is retention. Let's do interest. Cool. Looks like React Query is pretty dominant. I will say when I was doing React Native, React Query was a godsend. It was essential for working in React Native. And I am very thankful to see it overly represented here. I also see Zustand going up very slightly. Zustand's phenomenal, makes a lot of sense for these use cases as well. React hooks fell in interest. Fascinating to see that huge of a drop. And Jodi maintaining almost exactly. Legend state not even being included. Fascinating. Recoil moving up in position, but down in interest. I will say Recoil's in a weird spot, especially now that Jodi's as good as it is. The speed at which Jodi killed Recoil is fascinating to me. I've never even heard of React Easy State. Here's where things get interesting with MobX State Tree, Apollo Client finally going down. That's good to see. MobX State Tree at like 42. MobX State Tree and Apollo having the same levels of interest is hilarious to me. And Redux Toolkit being tied with that all. MobX still pretty high up here, and Redux falling in rank, but having the same exact level of interest. Fascinating. Let's take a look at actual usage. So what are people using? Obviously, they're all using React hooks. Painful number are using Redux, although it is going down. Redux Toolkit appeared and is doing well. TanStack Query is up a huge chunk. Not surprising. It's pretty great technology. Apollo's down. Good to see. Zustand's up almost like doubling. Huge. Recoil is exactly the same. MobX is 20%, which is fascinating. Jodi is up to 14%. MobX beating out Jodi is crazy to me, though. Again, like this is a different world we're peering into as web devs. It's fascinating to see. Experience over time. Oh, of course, Jamin came in. My own MobX state tree. I called this so hard without even scrolling. I love that. Yeah, Jamin, if you guys don't know him, he runs Infinite Red. Great dude, really deep on React Native and hangs out in this place a ton. And built MobX State Tree. Experience over time. Overview of opinions of the technology surveyed over time. Apollo clients going down, Jodi is going up, TanStack's going up, Recoil's steady to declining, Redux is declining, React hooks are flat and maxed out, and Zustand is growing pretty alarmingly. Checks out. Sentiment split. This is the would use again chart that's in all of these surveys. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jamin. That's a pretty big not interested bar. I will make it a point to try MobX State Tree because this spread makes me sad. But this spread makes me feel great. Seeing TanStack Query and Zustand killing it at the top up here, and anything with the word Redux in it having a huge push left doesn't surprise me. Yeah, this lines up almost exactly with my expectations if you just trim the MobX part at the bottom. Everything else here is roughly what I expected. Overall happiness. This is very different from the other charts I've been seeing in the other surveys. People seem very happy with the React Native ecosystem overall, at least for state management. It's like 6% are unhappy. Everyone else seems happy. And a bunch of other write-ins. Nothing too interesting there. Oh, look at that, Sebastian. Anyways, where things get really interesting is data fetching. I'm actually very curious what you'll have to say there. And yes, I pronounced Zustand wrong. It's just a meme at this point. I'm sorry. Data fetching. TanStack Query stays at the top. This is retention. We want usage, I would say. Fetch, very common. Axios. Why is Axios so common? What the fuck? Why are 88% of React Native devs still using Axios? What? I'm going to not hang out there for too long because it'll stress me out. Apollo dropping a bunch is nice to see. TanStack going up is nice to see. RDK Query appearing is nice to see. STBR going down. Oh, TRPC skyrocketed, almost doubled. Yeah, see that spike up there for TRPC? That's really cool. Axios flatlining is a little less cool. Why does everyone like Axios? What? Why are Axios' sentiment scores better than Fetch's? Someone in the comments let me know what I'm missing because I feel like I'm going insane. Okay, this is also very interesting. So I've talked to a bunch of React Native people, specifically on the Expo side, and the conclusion was that data fetching and data loading in React Native was miserable. And that's why they are pushing as hard as they are on things like server components. This suggests otherwise, which is very interesting to me, that React Native devs don't perceive an issue with the current state of data fetching. Navigation, everyone's favorite. As a web dev, I'll say mobile dev has a lot more going on in navigation. It's really interesting. React Navigation flatlined. Expo router more than doubled from 12 to 40% because it's really out and stable now. React Native navigation's plummeting. React Router's plummeting. People use React Router on mobile? That scares me. And the navigation router, which I've never heard of and hopefully don't have to. Look at that. Evan was the one who wrote this little blurb here. He's the creator of Expo Router and legend over at the Expo team. He also talks about here that there were so many reasons to be excited about navigation in 2023, mainly due to the incredible orchestration. Big part was his collab with Software Mansion, which again, people who created the survey, huge shout out. They make a bunch of the necessary libraries for good animation and such in React Native. And they helped a bunch with the router stuff too, so they could build better routing, better navigation, better animations between views and things like that. The React Navigation team presented exciting new improvements for V7, including a static API, more streamlined development, and obviously Expo Router, which he wrote. Experience over time. Basically, everything is declining other than Expo Router. That's an interesting trend, and my suspicion will be Expo Router continues to grow. Sentiment split. Expo Router really killing it here. React Navigation's really good, so I expect that to stay for a while, but Expo Router for a 1.5-year-old thing doing that well is nuts. Overall happiness. Lean in pretty happy. And TanStack Router got written in by one person for other. That's hilarious. Styling. Styling in React Native is an interesting thing. I'm very curious to see how this one goes. Let's take a look at usage. Style Sheet API, which is the built-in for creating styles, went down a little bit, but still over 90. Inline styles, again, built-in stuff, went up a bit. Seems like inline styles are getting less scary to people. Style components went up 1% from 60 to 61. I will say I've seen a lot more styled components on mobile recently than web. They seem to have enjoyed it a lot and stuck with it. Tailwind React Native has lost a lot of positioning in the chart, even though its percentage has stayed the same. Restyle, again, actually went up, but fell a bunch because of the new things that have been introduced and the growth that they've seen. Native Wind jumped from 9% to 22%, more than doubling. Huge. Also, the Native Wind creator works at Expo now, so I would expect some much cooler tailwindy things in the future. And then Tamagui went from 6% to almost 20. Huge jump. And a bunch of these other new solutions that have been coming out too. And here we can see the chart of sentiment over time. Tamagui is one of the most vertical upwards lines I've seen here in a bit. Good for them. And obviously inline styling growing a weird amount. Sentiment split. Tamagui, similar to Expo Router, really killing it with these sentiment splits. A lot of people are cool with the Style Sheet API too. Native Wind has a surprisingly big not interested chunk. Very small used and wouldn't again though, which is for a Tailwind alternative is probably the better thing to index on. Very interesting. Overall, this is the most unhappy I've seen any of these charts so far. It's over 10% unhappy, but only 10-ish% are unhappy with the style solutions. Really interesting. The number of styling libraries doubled in 2023. Does this mean that developers are still looking for fresh approaches or are not satisfied with the current ones? The most important aspect for every library is to be cross-platform, especially as React Native extends beyond mobile, support advanced theming, which will easily style complex applications. The overall happiness with styling React Native is satisfying for the creators. Almost 90% of devs feel positive or neutral. It means that we, the library authors, did a good job in the past year. The doubled number of libraries could finally meet the needs of the market. Sounds pretty fair to me. Component libraries, this is a more niche version of the style stuff we saw. So Tamagui is going to rank real high here because it's one of the best component libraries for React Native. Yep, Tamagui, really good sentiment split. Here we're going to see a bit more unhappiness because component libraries in general suck, but component libraries in React Native extra suck. Graphics and animations, ranking. Interesting seeing React Native Skia doing this well. Let's switch to usage because I don't think its usage will be that high. Yeah. React Native Skia, for those who don't know, is a React Native binding to the Skia engine. If you don't know Skia, it's the engine that runs Flutter. The reason I hate Flutter so much is it forces you to put everything in this like game engine type layer where it's not rendering native text or native buttons or using any of the parts of your native platform. It's almost like if you're a web dev, putting everything in a canvas. React Native Skia is much more interesting to me because you don't have to use it for everything. If you have specific views where it makes sense to have that level of like animation and graphical fidelity that isn't using the native platform, is instead using the GPU. So if you're doing all that type of animation stuff, this makes sense. But if you're doing more like having a little notification pop up in your phone that's like, hey, we're doing this thing, press OK. The way you do that with Skia is screenshots of the original native UI, which is why everything feels so uncanny in like a Flutter iOS app. React Native Skia helps you find a balance where you can use React Native and existing native bindings where it makes sense, but you can use Skia for the parts that need that animation fidelity. Cool to see it getting more recognition. Your intuition with animation on mobile, specifically with something like React Native, might be that JavaScript would suck for it. Because if your JavaScript has to run on every frame and your phone's like 120 hertz, that's just going to kill performance and eat a ton of CPU, right? Well, most animations aren't something that needs to be updated from your UI layer that constantly. We already know this because in CSS, we don't say, hey, here's every single position on every frame. We'll often create an animation in CSS. It says, hey, you start here, you end here. Here's your curve. Go do that on the GPU. I'm going to get back to work. And that's how React Native Reanimated works. It does everything on the native iOS, Android, or whatever other platform layer. So you're just telling the native layer, hey, move this here. I'm going to go do more JavaScript shit. And React Native Reanimated will figure out how to do that properly on the native platform. Again, it's one of those best of both worlds technologies that something like React Native enables better than anything I've seen before. Haven't used the animated API much, but I see it's growing. That's really cool to see. It's the built-in animation layer in React Native. The little bit I played with it, it was jank, but I have heard it improved. So that's cool to see. Lottie hurts me deeply. Lottie is a package for taking After Effects exports and rendering them in applications, primarily mobile, but also on web. It's huge. It's slow. It's hideous. I hate it. It's allowing for Adobe to have a weird stronghold on dev that they did not earn. And it's one of those weird Airbnb sins that has perpetuated through the industry for too long. And I'm really excited to see competition like Rive that is going to kill Lottie over time. Modi's also really good. React Native Skia's massively growing. React Native Animatable, I haven't heard anyone talk about in a while. 3JS is dope. React 3 Fiber is awesome. React 3 Fiber on mobile is super underrated too. Expo GL, also underrated, but no one wants to write their own GL calls directly. And then Rive, starting to pick up a decent chunk here, as I mentioned before. I really want to see Rive eat Lottie. Why is Lottie going up? No, that hurts. Sentiment split. Everyone loves React Native Reanimated. This library is phenomenal. If you have played with React Native and haven't tried Reanimated, you should do it. It's really, really cool. The Skia stuff's also having a really good sentiment. Almost nobody who used it won't use it again. It's 0%. That's very interesting. It makes me more interested in checking that out in the future. Overall happiness is also way better than I would have expected. I'll be honest, I would never have guessed that when surveying a bunch of React Native devs, that around 6% would say unhappy with the current state of animation. My assumption would be most React Native devs would not be happy with things, but clearly I'm wrong. The state of stuff's really good right now. Debugging and profiling. This is where things get painful. Console logs are the easiest way to debug in everything, especially React Native. I'll admit it, the React Native debugging tools just are not good enough compared to other solutions. Flipper is better than it was, but it still sucks to set up and do right. Compared to doing things in the browser, it's just different levels. Never in my life have I made as many 1 pixel red borders as I did in React Native, just trying to figure out where things are going. Flutter did a much better job of this, just letting you know what's rendering where. React Native could meaningfully improve here. So I'm curious to see what the sentiment is about it. Let's just scroll to the sentiment. The biggest problems are connecting to Flipper. Yeah, connecting to Flipper sucks. Why wouldn't they poll for the sentiment for debugging? It's one of the most interesting things. I would be very curious how most React Native devs feel about debugging in React Native, which we just don't know from this. Performance profiling. Yeah, everyone just uses Flipper. Some use the native stuff for Xcode and Android Studio, but not many. Nothing too surprising here. Yeah, Expo built their Chrome DevTool integration, which is really nice. Expo and Meta are forming a debugging working group. Looks like they are putting a lot of work into progressing here. This is good to see. I would expect to see massive changes in how we debug React Native apps over the next year or two, and this is just the start. Let's take a look at React Native features. Seems like everyone is using Hermes now, at least the Hermes runtime. This isn't static Hermes. If you're curious about that, I have a whole video about JS at the speed of C. This is the just-in-time compiler for your JavaScript so that the bundles can load and start up faster because we don't need to use V8. It's mobile. I have been corrected by Ethan. Hermes runtime is better described as an ahead-of-time bytecode compiler where it takes the things that the JavaScript would have put into your memory and does that for you ahead so you don't have to do that. Also have custom native modules doing way better. Not surprising. It's gotten much easier over time. The JSC runtime gone down a bit. Exo modules have gone up a bunch. Exo modules are dope. Really good to see. JSI dropping. V8 runtime dropping massive. Or not massively, just 4%. Still pretty big though. New architecture going up. Custom native views going up. Fabric going down slightly. Turbo native modules going up slightly. Sentiment split. Everyone loves the Hermes runtime. Most people love the new architecture. You don't know the new architecture. The way that React Native communicates with the native layer has been rebuilt from scratch, and it's in a really, really good spot now. People are really done with V8 and JSC, which makes sense because those are both a mess, but Hermes is doing very, very well. Do you integrate React Native with applications written using other technologies? This is interesting. 78% of the devs who did the survey are working in standalone greenfield apps, which checks out, but not too surprising to see just how few devs are not building React Native views in existing apps. This is what I was trying to push for at Twitch, that certain pieces within the app, like the creator portion for the dashboard, for when I'm managing my stream, that could be a React Native app made by the creator team, and the rest of the mobile app could be by the specific iOS and Android mobile teams. The mobile teams didn't like this proposal. They didn't want JavaScript. The exact quote from one of the mobile engs was, "I would certainly quit if your janky JavaScript ever touched my beautiful Swift." So knowing how mobile devs feel, this doesn't surprise me too much. Code sharing. A lot of sharing with React Native Web. I will say my model for sharing with React Native is a mono repo where shared pieces like your hooks, your data fetching logic, your state management, all those types of things, those all would exist within a separate package or folder in the repo that both the mobile app built in React Native and the web app built with, Next could be shared. OTA updating, EIS and code push. Again, over-the-air updates are one of the best reasons to use React Native, and it's cool seeing them get this type of support. It's OTA is huge and big part of why you should use something like React Native. Ta-da. This is awesome. This is a senior software engineer at Microsoft who's also a React Native contributor. I had some really good talks with Lorenzo at Chain React. Great dude. They're focused on a ton of things at Microsoft to make React Native Windows apps a way better experience, including things like React Native Test App, bridgeless support, etc. Really cool stuff. Oh boy, this is where I'm going to feel a lot of pain. We're about to see the word Firebase come up way too often. Analytics, a lot of Firebase, a little bit of mixed panel, a little bit of amplitude, decent bit of segment, nowhere near enough post hog. Does post hog have React Native options, or at least advertise them? Let's see. Yeah, they have a doc for it. Yeah, they should push that more, because Firebase does not deserve to have this type of stronghold where of the total survey respondents, almost half are using Firebase Analytics. That's terrifying to me. That is terrifying to me. We also have Sentry here with the crash reporting. That doesn't surprise me. It's nice to see them beating out Firebase. I would not have guessed that. I was trying out Bugsnag when I was using React Native, and it was not in a great state for React Native stuff. Nice to see Sentry winning here because they have good path there. Data Viz, everyone uses React Native SVG. I did not know there was a Victory native. You're already familiar with Victory. It's a chart visualization library that makes really pretty charts in React. And now I guess it works on React Native too. Cool to see. Did not know that. React Native Chart Kit, which I haven't heard of, and Recharts. Oh, this is all Data Viz. So for Data Viz, most people are using SVGs still, which is hilarious. Storage, React Native async storage. This is the standard, has been for a while. Not surprised to see it here. MMKV is much faster. I do remember trying this one and being much happier with it. Interesting. So MMKV was originally developed by WeChat, and this is a React Native binding for it. And it takes advantage of the new React Native stuff to go straight through the C++ lib. Very, very nice. Yeah, cool to see that growing. And Expo SQLite doing decently well too. That one's interesting. For those who don't know, SQLite's pretty heavily used on mobile as like the storage solution because the logic can be portable between different operating systems. And SQLite's something that's supported pretty well and pretty quick on almost every operating system. So you can write your data logic once and reuse it between lots of things. One of the crazy examples of this is that most of the logic for Messenger is written in SQLite. Yes, Facebook Messenger is mostly built in SQLite. If I should do a video about that, let me know because I think it's really interesting. Testing. I don't care. I'm just sad to see Storybook getting that much representation here. Other popular libraries. Safe area context should just be built in. Gesture handler should probably just be built in. React Native Web View probably shouldn't be built in, but interesting that 1,000 of the 2,400 or so people are using that. Flash list should be way higher. If you guys don't know Flash list, this is the list everyone should use in React Native. Stop using flat list. It is bad. Flash list is really good. Flash list is better than most of the Swift list solutions, which I know are bad because when I open up the download tab here, it freezes my Arc browser because they don't have a good way to deal with the length of my download folder list. I've talked to the team about it since, and they're blaming Swift UI for it, which shows you just how hard it is to make a list that is performant. So yes, Flash list is the way you should do lists. Shopify put a lot of work into making this. I've talked to the people who worked on it. They are very, very smart, and this list is very, very performant. Use Flash list, it's good. Expo image, I loved Expo image. It was so useful for so much shit. It lets you embed images on the fly, do lots of different types of compression for different platforms. I have been deep in this package. Interesting overall. Vision cameras, fascinating to see here too. Local first app architecture. Would use again, would not use, interested, not interested, never heard. This is the idea of your app doing everything locally. So instead of you press a button and it makes a network request, it would be you press a button, it updates the UI locally while in the background making the network request or putting it in a queue to be made in the future. So if you lose internet connection, you can still use the app normally, building up a queue of things to be submitted whenever you get internet connection again. A lot of apps probably should lean into this more. Something like, I don't know, my note-taking app, Notion. It'd be really nice if Notion had a better offline local first experience. And I would expect more and more apps to be building tools for this, but not everyone is. And most of the time our apps are exposing a web view and we're not expecting them to work when they're not online. So it's an interesting balance and surprised so many have not heard of. Ooh boy, deployment. This will be a fun one. EAS smoke in the top here. We'll switch to usage. Interesting. For attention and interest, EAS wins, but once we go to actual usage, they immediately fall a ton. I know I was manually building my React Native apps with Xcode up until I basically begged Evan Bacon from the Expo team to jump in my repo and help us figure out why EAS wasn't working. Ended up being some dumb config stuff. He just deleted half the config files and it worked as expected, which was dope to see. We were overcomplicating things. But once you have your Xcode setup working, you're really scared to change things because making mobile apps is hard. But EAS build took all that pain away. Now, the same way I do with something like Vercel, I just push up the code when I'm done and a build pops out of my dev tools. It's great. EAS build and submit have made a lot of the pain I had building React Native apps almost instantaneously go away. So if it wasn't for EAS being in here, I wouldn't use React Native probably at all at this point. Experience over time. Yeah, everyone's loving EAS build and everything else is dipping downwards. Checks out. Sentiment split. And again, EAS build and submit just winning up here. 3 people said Xcode Cloud. Xcode Cloud is such a meme. I almost want to do like a deep dive on it just to make fun of it a bunch. Interesting that Simon's at Software Mansion and works at Expo. I did not know people were overlapping like that. React Native devs are increasingly interested in using automated build and deployment tools to handle the building and distribution of their apps. Simultaneously, their interest in using manual tools like Xcode and Android Studio appears to be waning. This makes sense. Dealing with all of those weird, like building a React Native app is more annoying than coding a React Native app by a lot. So nice to see that the industry is shifting in the direction of Expo and the awesome stuff that they've been building. React Native tools. Again, EAS slaughtering. We'll switch this to usage. React Native Community CLI dropped a ton. Expo CLI jumped a bunch. Expo Go doing pretty well. So it goes mostly a rebranding of the Expo app, so that's why it's only on this side. Expo Snack. Expo Snack I just haven't seen too much use of. It's like, think of it like a code sandbox embed for React Native to show demos of different components and such. Seems really cool. I just haven't seen it much. EAS CLI is at a nice 56% now. Upgrade helpers at the same 56. Config plugins 47. 11 to 12 for Ignite. Ignite's kind of like the Create T3 app of React Native, where it's built now around Expo. It's been around forever. It's by the team over at Infinite Red. It's meant to take the current state of the art for React Native apps and make it quick to build. We have the RNX kit too, which is doing a bit better. React Native test app. This is the Microsoft one at 8%. Very interesting. React Native Community CLI is tanking. This looks like the Create React app story all over again. Cool to see. Sentiment split. Everyone loves the Expo stuff. Everyone loves config plugins. Expo Snack and Go are a little less loved, but still decently positive. React Native Community CLI is starting to dip. And Ignite's dipping a bunch. Jamin, talk to me. What's going on here? It comes as no surprise to me that Expo is the clear leader here in terms of React Native developer tooling. Yeah, they're doing a great job at this. The JS to TS balance. I want to meet this 5%. Who is writing their React Native app entirely in JavaScript? 71 people. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Package managers, for those who don't know, Yarn has a very strong hold on the React Native community because getting your bundles working with other tools sucked. It's better now. But with like web dev, you never had to use Yarn. It made things faster and nicer at times, but it was never necessary to use Yarn. With React Native, for a long time, you had to use Yarn. So it has a huge hold of projects and users who know that. I even still instinctively reach for Yarn when building React Native apps. Thankfully, things have gotten better and PNPM mostly works with React Native now. But you can even see here that PNPM and Bun have the same-ish number of users. That's how long it's taken for React Native to not be so Yarn-y. Here we have the starter templates. Expo's winning. Ignite's there. Wow. We made it in. Fuck yeah. I did not think T3 Turbo was going to make it in here. Great work, Julius. I had almost nothing to do with Turbo other than like communicating my philosophy about it. This is all work by Julius. I mentioned before throughout how we think about React Native, and my goal isn't to make your React Native app run everywhere. It's use React Native for native stuff and use web for web stuff. And Create T3 Turbo makes it really easy to connect your native app, your web app, TRPC, have these all as packages that all work well together. Really cool to see it getting enough attention to be referenced in the survey. Awesome. Really cool to see. This blurb is actually important because it calls out the work Microsoft's doing. I feel like I don't talk about this enough. Microsoft's working really, really hard to get React Native to the point where you can build one code base for Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. They want this desperately because they've failed even more so building good application development tools for modern Windows, and they're having circles run around them by these other platforms. So if they can make a good enough experience to target all of those platforms, including Windows, then Windows might not get left behind. So they have a huge incentive to get this right, and it's cool to see them putting their money where their mouth is. React Native alternatives. Oh no, I'm sad this is the final section. Oh, that makes sense. A lot of the alternatives people are interested in are more web-based, like Cordova and Ionic. Although Flutter's too high up. I don't like Flutter beating out SwiftUI. That makes me sad because I actually like SwiftUI. Xamarin's still here. I'm going to skip. Let's just forget about Xamarin. Jetpack Compose, I'll be honest, I know basically nothing about Jetpack Compose, but I've heard really, really positive things from the people I know who have played with it. So I probably should look into it more. Let me know in the comments if I should. Native script from 7 to 8%. Oof. Kotlin multi-platform from 4 to 6%. Meh. And Felgo vanished. Experience over time. Yay, Flutter is people dipping. Nice to see. Everyone hates Cordova. Holy shit. 1.9% would use it again. Everyone else hates it, even though they're stuck on it. SwiftUI is getting slightly more positive. Checks out. Yeah, that all makes sense. Yep, and again, with me saying Swift is nice. Seems like the sentiment shift here makes sense. I'm realizing now a lot of y'all probably have never seen SwiftUI code. This might look a little familiar if you are a JavaScript or React dev. Imagine if instead of function calls with all of these additional bits, that this was, I don't know, maybe like a HTML tag, and that these were all keys being passed to it. This is JSX without the JSX. This idea of vertical composing of components is very, very inspired by React. Different syntax, same shape and goal. This is also the syntax that's being used for the ZUI Rust thing they're working on too. Seems like this type of structuring of your UIs around components, it won. And if you're already familiar with components, SwiftUI is going to not be too hard to pick up. I don't know jack shit about Kotlin multi-platform. I've, again, heard good things, so I should look into it. Not enough to confidently say anything. And Flutter, people are very unhappy with. This is nice to see. Used it, wouldn't again 7, used would again 5. We're winning, slow but sure. Jetpack Compose, a lot of not interested, but not a lot of used and wouldn't again. Native script's having a rough time though. So is Ionic, so is Xamarin, and Cordova's basically a skeleton. It's a corpse. It smells like it too. Oh, Simon. You guys don't know Simon Grimm. He actually, just today, won't be today anymore when the video comes out, I did a podcast with him all about React Native. So if you want to check that out, and we're talking more in depth about React Native stuff, go find this. We'll try to put the link in the description. Last section, resources. Most people go to the React Native docs or the Expo docs. Surprising number of self-directed learning, videos, all the usual. Podcasts are low, but not too low. Podcasts and on-the-job training are scary close, though. Look at that. Sebastian's the one who wrote this part. 3 thriving React Native podcasts. Expo consolidating documentation. Finally. New architecture documentation finally happened. Lots of progress has been made here. Blogs, magazines, and newsletters. This Week in React, again, check out Sebastian Lorber's stuff. He's been informing this channel for a while. Not surprised to see him so high up in here. Sites, courses, and books. React Native docs and Stack Overflow are really high. YouTube is over Expo docs. Hey, Evan, I'm winning now. How does that feel? Podcast, do they have? Yes. Woo! There we are. Was waiting for it. Primogen and Fireship being in here is also dope to see, but I'm pumped. I'm number 2. I should probably know who this is. Oh yeah, I know William. He is at 100K. I will help with that. I will do my part. Good to have a nice win at the end. People, I wonder if me having my handle like that has caused me. Am I the only one who has a handle here instead of like just their name? Why? Interesting. Cool. I'll take my spot. Other surveys, the state of JS. So me referencing state of JS earlier actually made sense. Oh, yeah. Evan at the top. Okay, Evan, you can have your win back. Wait, 47 versus... Fuck. Grr. Anyways. Opinions. This will actually be an interesting section. React Native is moving in the right direction. Seems like agree strongly is actually growing quite a bit. Imagine this in the React survey. We don't have the results from the React survey yet, but I am guaranteeing it's not going to be this positive. This type of shift, like a 50% increase from before to after in the general vibe from the community. Interesting. The neutral's gone down. The disagree is at 2.3%. Disagree strong is 0.3 versus 0.5, 2.4. Yeah, disagree is going down and it's minuscule. Like, imagine the question to React devs, how many of you disagree strongly that React is moving in the right direction? That's going to be like 30% right now because people are livid at the moment. So if any chart in this entire thing emphasizes the gap between the React community and the React Native community, this is the one. Building React Native apps is overly complex right now. This is a very clean split across. Disagree is pretty high, but disagree strongly isn't. And I would agree. It's like React Native isn't the easiest thing to set up compared to, like, I don't know, Next.js, but it's improved so much over time and it still is less bad than native mobile apps. The React Native ecosystem is changing too fast. Mostly neutral to disagree, but solid 23-ish% agree to agree strongly. Again, I guarantee this one's going to be very different in a React survey. Oh, React Native pain points. I called it earlier. Debugging, almost half. Unmaintained packages, pretty high up there too. Thankfully, Expo has made this less a problem because there's so many great packages in their ecosystem. Dealing with native code. I bet this is lower than last year. I'm curious if they measure that. Upgrades, keyboard handling. Keyboards are rough in general, but especially on React Native. Keyboard avoid view doesn't work. Yeah, most of this stuff makes sense to me. Missing features, better debugging, Android shadows. Oh, Android shadows are a shit show. You have a better flat list. Just use flash list. It should be the default, but just install the package. It's not that scary. Better performance. Like, performance isn't... Actually, I think it's interesting that performance is so much lower than a lot of other things because it's not a big deal. People associate React Native apps with bad performance, and that just isn't too big a deal anymore. Fetch API stream support. Interesting. Didn't know that was a problem right now. Is that why everybody's using fucking Axios? I'm not going to think about that anymore. It'll just make me mad. React Native advantages. Cross-platform, hot reloading, community, code sharing, Expo. Whereas OTA updates is way too low. This should be the top because nothing does it as well as React Native. Expo being near the top makes a lot of sense though. Developer experience, cost-effective, easy to learn, native feel. Yeah. Stable performance and other are pretty low on here. Stable and performance being low is funny. Another point from Thomas. It's encouraging to see the efforts of Meta and other major players in the ecosystem to actively collaborate and improve the capabilities in terms of debugging, upgrades, and dealing with native code, effectively addressing the feedback from last year's edition of the survey. The focus has shifted towards improving developer experience, with unclear error messages ranking higher than stability or performance concerns, confirming the maturity of the framework. That's really interesting. That error messages being unclear is more concerning than stability and performance now. React Native is doing pretty damn good. Let's take a look at the conclusion. Last year was a good year for React Native. I'm inclined to agree. With rising stars in the styling space, innovations in navigation, and improvements in debugging, it's hard not to say that we're living in the best years of React Native so far. We're yet to unfold what server components and the new architecture will bring to the table. I'd like to define the current state of React Native as stable, but definitely not boring. It seems like in these uncertain times, the ecosystem thrives. Hope you found the survey data reassuring in the same way I did. I'm sure you're going to use it to make better informed decisions. Fantastic stuff. Again, huge shout out to Software Mansion and everyone involved in these surveys. These things aren't easy to make. It wasn't even easy to sit here and read through it all. I hope this was useful to y'all. This was a lot of work to do. Let me know in the comments what your favorite and least favorite parts were. Until next time, see you guys later. Peace, nerds.